Got a lot of requests lately from viewers that they wanted to actually see an engine rebuild. So what we got here is we have a 440 Chrysler. We got our crankshaft. First thing we got to do is we got to mic the crank to establish the size. Everything's been final washed with hot soap and water, or hot water and soap rather. So what we're going to do is we're going to mic this. We have established that this crankshaft is 20 thousandths undersized. Standard size on this crankshaft is 2-inch 750 thousandths or 2 3/4. We got 2-inch 730 thousandths. So what we've done is we've taken one of our bearings and our bearing caps, and we're going to set that up in the motor. Now the way we do that, and we put our bearing in here because we want to establish our oil clearances. So we've got a bearing in the engine here, and we have our bearing cap and our bearing. Now what we do is we're going to go ahead and put this on here, and we're going to get these bolts started here. We want to get the bolts started, and then we have to go ahead and do what we call seating the cap, and hopefully we don't drop the hammer in the process. So if you see the gap down there, there's a pretty big gap. We have to actually take our hammer and seat that down in there. If you don't do that, if you try to tighten these bolts up without seating that cap, there's a very good possibility that you could actually crack that main cap, and I know that's probably not something that you want to do. So we're going to run our bolts down and torque them to specs. Once we get the bolts run down and torqued to specs, we're going to measure the inside diameter of that bearing because we want to establish our oil clearances. The oil clearance is basically the amount of clearance that the crankshaft has when it rides inside of that babbited bearing. So once the crankshaft is in there, the bearing bore, or the bore that the bearing is producing when it's torqued in, has to be slightly larger than the crankshaft. On a big block crank like this, we want to see about 2.5 to 3 thousandths of clearance on the mains, which is what these are. So we're going to go ahead and put these in here, and we're going to torque them to specifications. Once we get these torqued, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to establish, or try to establish, our oil clearances. So we've got our bore gauge set up over here. This is a dial bore gauge, and this is set up for the same size as this crankshaft. My zero on my gauge is exactly the same size as the diameter of this main. So if I put this in the bore, the difference should be my clearance. So I'm going to go ahead and very carefully put this in, and then we're going to look at our gauge. So we're going to establish our clearance here. Let's get this in there, find our center, and this is a 5/10,000ths indicator. So what we have, if you look at this bore gauge here, we have about 2.5 thousandths clearance, which is good. So if you take a look at that, what we've done is we've put that right in there, and we're measuring the inside diameter. We got about 2.5 thousandths clearance, which is perfect. Now that we've established our clearances, we'll go ahead and do that for all of them to make sure that they're all right. Once we get that done, we can lay the crank. And in the next video, we'll show you how to do that.